and only like one term, 2-year term of a Democrat, I think in the 60s, was on Ways and Means. And so it's one of the most important committees because of that issue. But the specific thing about the House Ways and Means, it's the only committee that can start a revenue type of bill. And because you can't generate that revenue from the Senate. All that revenue always, those bills always have to start in the House. And so that's why it's particularly very, very influential.
Talk about just the dynamics that you're experiencing right now. In the House, you have a very narrow majority for the Republicans. I think it's...
Don't we all know it?
219 to 213. How are you navigating that? What is happening right there as you can see it, as you try to find a path for some good policy? Are you able to get there? Just give us a sense of that dynamic right now.
Right, so with a narrow majority and the new rule where one person can offer a motion to vacate the speaker, it basically makes it so 2 to 5 people can kind of block anything, control anything, and have a significant outsized impact than they really ever have had before. And that's causing a lot of consternation among that you saw from Speaker McCarthy, and Speaker Johnson's now going through many of the same issues. And it's tough. It's tough to navigate. What I don't like about Congress is that out of the House of Representatives, and I saw this in the minority, and I complained about it all the time, so I'm going to complain about it again when I'm in the majority. I generally agree with the legislative work that we're doing and pushing forward, and I'm supportive of it. But when I was in the minority, there was all of these bills that were completely partisan. I imagine this: we have a Senate and we have a House, and they have to pass the exact same bill verbatim, right? And in the Senate, it can only pass with a 60-vote margin. It has to pass with more than 60 votes. It has to be collaborative and bipartisan. In the House, it only has to pass with a simple majority. You just need 218 votes. If everybody's there, 216, if a few people are absent, that kind of thing. And that sets us up for complete dysfunction. So now a handful of people are saying, look, I'm never going to vote on a bill that's gone through any type of compromise. I'm just never going to vote on it. And so don't bring it to the floor, or we're going to vacate you. And those 3 or 5 people can say that, and then they'll get all the Democrats to come on board, and also be like, well, let's create some more dysfunction, and let's all vote to vacate. So this speaker, this drama that exists, that's kind of what's going on.
Yeah.
And, great. And oftentimes, the House will put forward a bill over to the Senate as kind of like, hey, here's our stake in the ground. This is what we want to see done, knowing that it's not going to pass, because we know that Senator Schumer wouldn't take it up, but at least it's a set of policy objectives that is now open for discussion over here, and they will work through that, and then they'll send it back to us, and that may lose some folks and maybe get a majority of people to come on board, and that's the part that we've navigated. And look, Republicans get criticized a lot. Oh, you're going to take us to a default. You're going to take us to shutting the government down. Well, that hasn't happened. We've actually used those moments to negotiate and hopefully get better outcomes.
I was really curious about this particular issue, this motion to vacate, which we saw, the small group. Is that really guiding decisions right now? I mean, not wholly, but
not wholly.
But is it coming up often enough that it's in the back of people's minds?
It will absolutely be in the back of any speaker in this. With this current rules package, it will be in the back of every speaker's mind, yes.
Okay. Can we get to some policy issues? One of the things that was a quote from you. You said that our nation's debt is the #1 short and long-term challenge. We're sitting with our community members. We're sitting with our students.
Are we getting grab the clicker? Because we're going to talk some slides here too.
Oh,
you're not going to.
I wasn't prepared for it.
I'm a former Cicero consultant, which
so.
I was the Dan Jones guy before it became you all. So I like slides.
Do you have one on the debt?
I got several on the debt. Sorry to surprise you there.
Okay, let's see what you got.
All right,
here.
let me just quickly go through some of this. We've been here before. Our debt to GDP ratio is the same as where it was in World War II. Okay, dangerous level. Anytime you get to 100% debt to GDP, you're at a very, very concerning level. Now, half of me is really encouraged because we've been here before and we dealt with it. As policymakers, we were able to deal with it. The other half of me is very concerned because the composition of our budget was so much different back in the 40s. What was the major spending item from our federal government back in the 40s? Yeah, defense, right? Well, once the war ramped down, and we had other conflicts. We had Korea and then Vietnam. We had some of those, but not to the level that we had in World War II. So we reduced spending. We get a bunch of Americans from the greatest generation back into the workforce. We grow our economy. We grow that revenue. We overcome some of our debt and deficit issues, and we got that puppy down to a very low, sustainable level, right? I love balanced budgets, all right, but we can talk about that separately, but that is a very positive trajectory to do. Then, over time, we kind of fluctuated a little bit. We had a little bit of a peak, and we got things back together. The late 90s, you had President Clinton, and a really strong leader, in my opinion, and I've worked under him in a few different capacities, but Secretary and Director Leon Panetta, he led a lot of the budget efforts. He was the chair of Budget Committee, of which I'm a member of, in Congress. Leon Panetta, I am really close friends with his son, Jimmy Panetta. He's a Democrat from the Monterey, California area, and we just passed a bipartisan debt commission bill. I'm really excited about. But just to keep going with this, all of a sudden 2008 hits, and our debt starts climbing significantly, consistently for years to come. And the trajectory is really, really terrifying to me. Now, what happened in 2000? Why in 2008 did all of a sudden a lot of our debt start compounding? Anybody want to take a shot at that one? 2008. So subprime mortgage happened, not the reason. But that's the first thing that everybody says. That's why I asked the question. So you're exactly right. And it was tough. There was some spending that took place there. That was largely paid back it was paid back with interest. And we kind of got through that moment. And we've had these bubbles that have happened in our economy over time. What happened in 2008 is actually a very good, productive thing, and an expected thing, is the baby boomer generation started to retire. And I love the baby boomer generation. They're my parents. They may or may not be in the room right now.
And be careful.
But if you want to get mad at me, don't worry. Even if my parents are here, they're fine with me taking some arrows. But my point is, we did not prepare for the generation that paid into the system to retire. And they retired at a pretty rapid clip. And we started to add more onto Social Security and Medicare than we ever had before, and we didn't prepare for that. Now, to get a little partisan here, I think the Democrats in the early 2000s were a bit short-sighted in how to address this. President Bush put on a plan to move some of our trust fund and what we were putting into the trust fund, the FICA, Social Security, that type of world. They wanted to be able to leverage a faster growing interest market, right? Mutual funds, things like that. Like that's not a negative thing. Mutual funds, the S&P was closing at what, $900 back in the early 2000s. What's it closing at today? Over 4,000. And if we would have put and had the opt-in potential to put money into a stronger interest, growing account, we would have had more money in the system now to cover that retirement age. And so that's an area that I think was short-sighted. And the way we're going to go about dealing with this now is the debt commission bill that we just passed. I'm hopeful it has a chance in the Senate. We do think it could pass the House. Anyway, we're pushing for that to be able to come together and look at all of these programs and how to address them. So I could go on and on about that, but that's one of the main reasons. And folks, that was something that's known and something that's good. That retirement class is going to get their benefit. They paid into it, and they deserve that, and that was the plan. The issue is I got to figure out something better for my kids. And what the system we have now is in 10 years, Social Security, if we do nothing, if Social Security, 24% of the benefit will be slashed in 10 years because that trust fund will be depleted. And that's the expected, 2033. And we've got to work over the next 5 years to come up with a better solution and an adjustment to this so we don't have that catastrophe happen. We have to avoid that. Because if we do nothing. So the voices out there that say, don't touch my Social Security. Well, if we don't touch it, and if we do nothing, you will get a 24% cut in less than 10 years. We need to reform these programs. We need to look at the caps. We need to look at the age limits. We need to look at the ability to put that into better interest-bearing accounts. And doing that in a comprehensive way, we have a chance. We have a chance in so I have a lot of negatives on debt and deficit, but overall, my positivity comes from what? We're the strongest economy still in the world. We have low unemployment, and we're still driving that forward. So those are all good things, and they give us a fighting chance to get out of this. The biggest fundamental problem with our budgeting right now, and the reason we have deficits that we do, is because the composition of our budget has drastically changed in 50 years. So 50 years ago, defense and domestic discretionary covered about 65, let's say 2/3 of our budget. Folks, and we vote on that every single year. The mandatory budgets are the things that get enacted in Congress, in our government, and then they exist and they go on in a direct or mandatory way without any annual voting piece that goes on. Right? These are your big government programs that get implemented and exist. Well, if you don't address them, they just grow, and they grow very rapidly. And then when you have a retirement class, and then this and that, and the worker benefit ratio and welfare programs continue to grow, all of a sudden, our mandatory portion that 50 years ago was only 1/3 is now over 2/3 of our budget. I think it's the most, I don't know the strongest word to use in this case, but it is at least, I'll go with the most unproductive and dangerous thing for me as a member of Congress to not vote on 71% of our budget on an annual basis. And that is flat out unbelievable to me. So I've introduced the Comprehensive Congressional Budget Act. Americans for Prosperity came to us with this idea to be able to take a holistic approach at our budget and just kind of force lawmakers to do their job, right? Because if I am only voting on defense and domestic discretionary on an annual basis, well, then we're never going to be able to make improvements and reforms to these programs that actually make sense, right?
So there's some pieces of process in this bill. It changes the process for input from these various stakeholders. What does that look like?
So the biggest, most important thing about the bill is it makes it so you have to incorporate the entirety of, now the input and everything, that's the debt commission bill. So not to confuse the two. Debt commission bill, we want experts, we want members of Congress in a bipartisan fashion to come together and make recommendations on how to deal with some of our biggest pressing budget issues. And then that's like this, like you've heard of Simpson Bowles. You've heard of the Greenspan Commission. We've done these before, but the difference is none of them required a vote. They were recommendations. This one would actually trigger and require a House and Senate floor vote on them, basically saying up or down. We're going to come up with a whole bunch of recommendations on how to deal with this. Folks, it's easier for politicians to just let this slide and not really address it, but we have to force action on this to be able to make change, and that's what I love about that particular bill. The comprehensive one, we'll do a few different things, and it basically just says we got to take all these things into consideration, and it maybe not on an annual basis, maybe on a 2 to 5 year basis, you have to say, okay, we've got to make some adjustments to our Medicare programs and our welfare and our SNAP and our CHIP and TANF and all those things. We've got to get more involved in doing that. Our veterans programs, they get put on mandatory basis, and guess what? We don't even get a chance to really try to improve them. Well, right now, the veterans, what they're going through right now on a healthcare basis is far more geared towards mental health problems and suicide rates than it was when a lot of these programs were set up, and we've got to make adjustments to it. And we just don't have the ability to get involved and really get our hands dirty and make new laws and work with the committees to kind of change that. The portion of the budget, this is I would think like the 10 big buckets of our spending. Only where you see a star, defense, non-defense discretionary, and some of the all other spending, those are the only programs that we actually vote on each year. And I think that is absolutely ridiculous. That would never happen in the state of Utah's legislature, right? And we continue to let these programs just grow without real, actually addressing them. And that's why we're going to run into these fiscal cliffs that are really dangerous. I would rather work to improve Social Security than let it just get 10 years from now and have 24% of the benefit cut to people that weren't expecting that or have to rely on it for some reason. And so there's lots of different things. Here's my biggest problem, though. My biggest issue is interest. The interest that we pay on our debt largely kind of stayed around 6% of our total spending. And over the last 5-ish years, and what we project out for the next couple, it's going to dramatically increase. And that creates the crowding out effect, right? So take your family budget. If you get into massive credit card debt and you're paying more on interest for your credit card than you ever have before, you all of a sudden can't send your kid to that basketball camp, or you can't really fix your car or get out ahead of the maintenance that your car needs. And then there's a bigger issue later, because that money that we're spending on interest is crowding out opportunities to address some of the other more important things within our budget. So I don't want to drown this on. I just wanted to share one last thing here. This is the non-defense discretionary budget. And over 25 years, it grows at a small rate because we vote on it each year. We get to be involved. We get to actually address it. We get to find areas of waste and dig in and understand it. This is what we used the debt ceiling for this year. It was growing rapidly the last few years, largely because of COVID, but that stuff was ending. But we used the debt ceiling to come and say, all right, in order for a debt ceiling increase, we're going to require some spending cuts. So what we did was, if you look at 2024, instead of a normal growth rate on these programs, which would be expected, 4.5%, largely the rate of typical inflation, 2 to 3, these programs can grow at that rate. That's not an atypical thing. But instead of growing we got to find some areas of waste. We're gonna use the debt ceiling to lower that baseline, and we lowered it to 703 and put some caps on it for the next couple years. And what that will do is that resets it, makes us all get together and find areas. Democrats came on board, Republicans were finding a negotiated spot to reach that number, in which in the next 6 years, we could potentially save $2 trillion from our budget that would have otherwise been spent. Not going to solve our debt issues, but it's a really, really good approach to being able to be a little bit more responsible. So those are kind of things that I really, he says misleading, absolutely not the case, but we can definitely debate this over and over again. So I said that it won't solve our debt problems. Just fixing this won't solve our debt problems. We have much bigger issues. So let me pause there.
Okay.
Thanks. Let me get through those slides. I enjoy that too much. I feel like a consultant again.
Yeah, we appreciate getting the information from the slides. Let me ask about what this kind of leads to a little bit too. It's something you talked about. This is for the next presidential election. It gets to tax policy a little bit. You said for the next presidential election is going to be about energy and tax policy. I want to talk about those two things for just a moment. On taxes in particular.
I didn't say it was going to be about that. It should be about that. Okay. Particularly,
it should be, huh?
Particularly tax policy.
Okay, so let's talk about tax policy for just a moment. The Tax Relief and American Families and Workers Act. Talk about that particular bill, particularly as it relates to small businesses, because this was a connection to this, the Small Business Growth Act, something you've been working on.
So the details of the bill are up here. When I say 2025 is going to be the Super Bowl of tax, what I mean by that is all of the tax provisions from the 2017 Tax Cut and Jobs Act largely expire. Some have met some timeline already. A couple expire in 2026. A few things continue on a permanent basis. But in 2025, it's going to be the year of tax, just because of everything's expired. If we do nothing, there will be approximately a $3.5 trillion increase in taxes, right? If we don't come together, and I flatly don't believe that will be good for continuing a strong economic growth pattern, right? And I think there's bipartisan agreement there. So 2025 is going to be about tax. And I often talk about so I hope that this year's election cycle will be about the things that matter most. Well, I can probably predict that the presidential election will be about anything but tax, when I wish it was just only about tax. I wish we were, in our political world, we were more focused on policy than a lot of the rhetoric that gets spewed all across the world and across the news channels and all that kind of stuff. So I am thrilled to be able to be on the committee that's going to be dealing with this. And we're going to have a chance to look at what's been successful in the past several years, what needs to be reformed, what needs to be doubled down on, and what areas that we're going to be doing. The Section 179 Small Business Growth Act, this was a really cool moment. And cool moments don't happen a lot in my world, but I'm sitting there in the Ways and Means lunch when Chairman Jason Smith came to our committee and said, all right, guys, I've been working for 5 months now with Senator Wyden, Democrat Senator, Chairman of the Finance Committee over in the Senate. We've been meeting regularly, as you know. I took all of your bills that we did in June, and we passed a big tax package in June. And it was only out of committee. It was not even going to ever pass the House of Representatives, but we had to finalize those bills so we could use those as negotiating. And there was a handful of things that were taken out of that bill. The three most important are research and development, interest deductibility, and 100% expensing. I can go into those in a little bit more detail if you like, but those are big, strong, pro-growth tax policies. They're good for businesses. They're good to grow your business. They're good for wage growth, all that type of stuff. And they had expired. So instead of writing off your R&D expenses in that first year, which had been the case since like the 50s, it was now amortized over 5. So if you had $1 million of R&D expenses, you could only actually write off 20% of that the next year, when up until that point, you were always able to write off 100% of that. And that was a big change to companies, and it was causing a lot of concern and some slowing of growth within some of our industries and things like that. So we reestablished that through the end of 2025. We give it retroactivity on those first three things. But Section 179, the Small Business Growth Act, that's our bill. So the chairman was like, you know, and there's three extra pieces that we were able to get in, and one of them was Blake's bill. And like I had to act cool, you know, like, oh yeah, great, that's awesome. Thanks, Chairman, that's really great. And I was like so excited. Like, it's tough to be productive back in this world, and to get our bill as one of the very few that was selected to be in this major package was a real honor. What that does is that increases the amount that a small business can use as a tax incentive to invest in their company, whether that's a capital expenditure, piece of manufacturing equipment, or a farm, a tractor, that kind of stuff. This gives small businesses a chance to write off more of that. It increases the limit on what they can do, and it's permanent. So it's permanent, and it will be that number until we decide to address it again.
The second part of that, after tax policy, you said it should be energy also. Your vision for what Congress should do when it comes to energy.
So the one other thing on this tax bill is something that's really important. Anytime you offer a tax incentive, there's a cost to that. And that cost goes into the ledger. And sometimes that creates deficits. We have to pay on those deficits. Republicans and Democrats over the last 25 years have created deficits, right? There's a different approach to doing it. But nonetheless, if you're going to lower taxes, you have to be willing to do the hard part at lowering spending. And that's typically the problem that we've had on the Republican side. It's very difficult politically to lower spending. In 2017, they did an awesome tax package that I agree with, but what I don't agree with is not using that moment also to try to get some of our spending more under control. And what happens there is some deficits come up. And as you see on the slide earlier, there's some interest that created from that. It's bad. Now on the Democrat side, when they had the White House, House, and Senate, in that moment to really go after their big policy issues, they knew that raising taxes was going to be too tough politically, but they still wanted to do some major spending proposals. And that was things like ARPA, Inflation Reduction Act, and those are multi-trillion-dollar bills that also add to our interest and to our deficits. And so we've got to get to a point where we're finding ways to make that even kill, and that's what this bill does. It's strongly bipartisan. 357 members of the House voted for it, and we all looked at the employee retention tax credit. It was used by good, solid people when they needed it during COVID, but it's run its course, and it has been taken advantage of, and it's costing taxpayers billions of extra dollars. So we are ending that. Like, full stop, ending it. Anything that had been in the system is going to get processed, but we got to end it. That saves us a bunch of money to be able to put it into more pro-growth tax policy things there. That's the kind of stuff, the kind of work that I'm excited about doing, and we found a really good compromise bill that I think everybody's mostly on board with. So what do you say about energy? Like, look, if America doesn't lead in this world, we will cede this to the nations that do not have the best interest of anybody outside of their own country, and definitely don't have any interest in the environment involved. Some of the biggest reducers of emissions has been the natural gas revolution, LNG, that type of stuff, right? That has been something that we've embraced as a nation, and if we are willing to export that and use that as a strong, we create better relationships with our allies, but if we limit that, then it will just be, that void will be filled by nations like Russia and Iran and China, and they don't have the best interest of anything other than their own objectives in mind. And so I'm a supporter of making sure we have a good, solid, comprehensive program, policy, and all the above approach. And I love the potential of nuclear. Nuclear hit this moment, you know, like we still have just horrible memories of the bad that nuclear could happen, but we're doing it so much safer and better. It's emission-free, requires some water. There's always these trade-offs, but it's a good potential, and I think we need to embrace it a little bit more. And what you've seen in Europe is like the negative, like the wave of of sort of rhetoric, and now we have to go all to renewables, and so they gave up some of their nuclear options, and then all of a sudden they can't create the baseload power, and all of a sudden they're relying more heavily on natural gas from Russia, and then a war breaks out, and it is really bad for our European partners. And so I'm just a very simple guy. All the above approach, you can use hydro, hydrogen, fossil fuels, and doing it as cleanly as possible, along with embracing renewables. The thing that I really appreciate that our local area is doing, look at what Rocky Mountain Power has been able to do in their portfolio. Upwards to 30% of their portfolio is renewables. And Gary Hogeveen, kind of the head of that operation, I've had him come back as a guest to meet with a bipartisan group of members of Congress to talk about permitting reform. And he says the thing that's hampering our ability to embrace better, cleaner fuel is this thing called NEPA, right? It's regulations that were established a long time ago, and they're inhibiting our ability to transmit some of these more cleaner, more efficient energy sources. And the debt ceiling that we did, we actually chipped away at that. We got some NEPA reform that had been long needed, and there's more that needs to be done on that. But I love the way Utah is approaching this. We have been able to grow, our population's grown, but our air quality has largely stayed, it hasn't grown with the population. We've found tier 3 fuels. We've embraced more renewables in our work. And so that's a positive way to go about doing it. And I just want to embrace that more and recognize that we do have to have fossil fuels. There is no scenario in which we don't have fossil fuels unless then it becomes a massive national security issue. So that's kind of the approach that I think we need to do a better job of taking. And I think there's more that everybody, any political ideology can do in that case.
Okay. You talked about those maybe should be part of that national dialogue for the presidential race, but one thing that seems clear is going to be is immigration, our southern border. Right. You've been very much involved in that very recently in a public way. Talk about what happened there, what comes down to the Secretary, Homeland Security, and also what you see happening on the border.
I think the best way to describe the attention that I got on the Secretary Mayorkas situation was, on that vote, was everybody that was mad at me, and there was a lot. We had more calls than I think we've ever had. That happened fast and furious. Everybody that was mad at me was wrong. Everybody that was super proud of me was wrong. It was only like the 13 people in the country that understand, like centuries old parliamentary procedure. Were like, oh, I know what he's doing, right? So it was a tied vote, and in that case, the bill was going to die. And our leadership team was like, hey, we need to have someone switch their vote, and so it can be offered as a motion to reconsider and do it again next week. I'm the new guy on leadership, so I guess you could say I drew the short straw, and I got a whole bunch of attention I really don't want. I don't really like. I told my comms director my first term, look, I'm not trying to go out there and get a bunch of national media attention. I want to do town halls. I want to talk to our local press. I want people to know what I'm doing back home, and I want to build that credibility. If I get to be chair of a committee, I want to be someone that can go on to every news station and talk tax policy with them, right? But I don't like spewing a lot of the rhetoric that goes on from our cable news world. So all of a sudden, I got a lot of attention where I usually haven't had before. It was a simple procedural thing. You can make the argument on both sides of this issue, and ultimately, we have to fix the problems with our immigration policy and our border security. And that's why I put this slide together. And all it's trying to emphasize is actually, putting myself in your shoes, trying to consume what's going on with all the voices going every which way would be so frustrating. I feel fortunate that I'm right in the fray, and it's as difficult as it is to be in that position. I am, I want to do my part to try to communicate what we need to be able to do. And it's as simple as this. We have to be willing to do some policies that will limit what the cartels are doing at our border. Our cartels are running the border right now. And what they're doing is they're lying to people, saying if we get you through the border, you're going to get into this system, you'll get into the legal system, and everything's going to be good for you. You'll get a chance to go and live and work in America. And that is not the case with our legal system right now, our asylum and our parole. That is not the case. Republican or Democrat, that is not how this works. The difference is the main policy that switched during the Trump years was to create a relationship with the Mexican government and saying, look, we're going to have people make their asylum claims, but we're going to do the migrant protection protocols, the Remain in Mexico policy, where they're going to remain in Mexico while their process goes through. What that fundamentally does is it takes the power away and the influence from the drug cartels, the Sinaloa cartel and others that exist down in Mexico. And we should all be united in making sure that these cartels stop what they're doing at the border, right? And so we need to find ways to do that. And it's all getting put together with foreign aid packages and this and that. Those negotiations are all still going on. Nothing is dead. Senate had a bill. It addressed more of immigration reform as opposed to border security. And so Speaker Johnson's going to go back and trying to meet with President Biden. There's potential of meeting here in the next little while. I hope President Biden accepts that and see where we can go. The problem, ultimately, is that Congress has ceded this power back too much to the White House. And this needs to stop just ping-ponging between a Republican and a Democrat, and we need to get firm, sound policies that are better at addressing this. And the answers are there. It's just if we can make that happen. If you want to look at a really good approach and framework for immigration, go to the Salt Lake Chamber, Salt Lake Chamber's Compact for Immigration Reform. It's very solid. It talks a lot about all the different elements that need to go on. Maria Salazar has a really good approach too that exists out there. So it's just tough, and it goes back to this just convoluted, and it's so difficult for people to understand, and especially when you add politics into it. But we have opportunities to still be the global leader that we are and support our friends and allies across the country. We need to continue to do that where possible, and also at the same time make sure that our southern border is getting addressed and fixed. So,
okay, can you take a couple questions from the audience? Where's William? William, he's got the microphone, so if you'll raise your hand, he'll try to make his way around.
Yeah, I'll bring it to you. Please wait till you have the mic to ask questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Congressman, for being here. I may be pretty young, but I know enough about history to know that the world as we see it today is eerily reminiscent of the one in which my 88-year-old grandfather was born. We have Russia going on the rampage in Europe like Nazi Germany at the time in the 30s, and Japan, or China like Japan was at the time. What do you think are some of the cornerstones that American grand strategy at this point should embrace when dealing with those two powers in particular?
Russia and China, did you say?
Yes.
Deterrence as best as we possibly can. We missed an opportunity in Ukraine to do more deterrence. I don't know to what extent we would have stopped them from invading at this moment, but more deterrence and stronger sanctions that attack critical industries are key. There's a lot of really unique proposals out right now on Ukraine. Something called the Repo Act. There is $300 billion of seized Russian oligarch money that for over the whatever last time period has been seized for nefarious and illegal activity on the part of international. This is not like the US seizing this money. This is elements in Europe and throughout the world. That money is seized, and there's an effort to leverage some of that money to support Ukraine. I mean, do you imagine a more ironic moment in history to use Russian oligarch money to combat the Russian invasion in Ukraine? And so, former President Trump has been vocal lately about a type of loan package to Ukraine, knowing there's risk to them being able to repay that. The more substantive, real work on the details of that is there's things that we need, particularly with nuclear reactors and some of that raw material that is being done in Ukraine that we could partner with them on as well, and that could be sort of a payback mechanism if we can secure their borders and secure that assault, right? And so that would be those are unique options. So being creative and trying to figure out how to do this, I wish we had a rainy day fund, right? To be able to go out and realize, okay, there's a problem, and we can go and support our allies in various places. We don't have that anymore. We've been running deficits for 25 years. We're in a major, major issue. Now, these are still very, very, very small portions. The aid that we've given to Ukraine is significant, but it is a tiny, tiny portion. It's less than 5% of our defense budget, and it is less than 1% of our entire budget, right? And with that, you've galvanized NATO, you've debilitated the Russian army, you replenish some of our stockpiles, things like that. So there's really positive elements that have come from that, and we need to identify the path forward. But we've got to find a resolution over there. And if it means get Ukraine in a strengthening position to negotiate and get this war ended, like I'm all for it. And what regions that would be and identifying what that looks like is going to be a tough piece. With regards to China, deterrence in Taiwan and making it very, very prickly for them to be like, okay, this might not be the best idea in the world. Let's hold off on this potential invasion that Xi Jinping has indicated he wants to do. We have a significant portion of our chip manufacturing in Taiwan, and like 90% of the critical chip manufacturing going on in Taiwan. That threat right there would massively, affect our supply chain and would be a big problem. And if Japan decides to go into this fight, they're a strong ally. We're more likely to put boots on the ground, and I have major concerns on doing that, and I'm hopeful that we can really strongly deter China from trying to make any of those advances. So deterrence has to be first and foremost on our mind, and we've done a lot of it, and we need to continue on that path. Next.
So the concept and topic of immigration, I think it shouldn't just stop at illegal immigration. So I was wondering, are there any current proposals in Congress or things that you would like to see to support the process of legal immigration as well?
Right. Well, so one thing I've been very unique on doing is our J-1 visa program. It's not going to fix the big macro aspect of it, but it's very specific to Utah. Anytime you go up to a ski resort and you see someone's name tag that says Uruguay or New Zealand or something, that's because of a cool program that Congress has started that I have reintroduced a resolution to enhance and continue on. Getting more people to be able to come here legally and come work in some of our resort areas, and they get to come here for a season. It's positive for them. They get a great experience. They may end up coming back and have a better option to come back and work here full time. We have a workforce need, a significant workforce need that we have to revamp what we're doing on H-2A and H-2B. And so we've done a lot. There's plenty of bills that are getting worked on through that type of world as well. And getting those numbers right, allowing the states to be able to determine what percentage that they need more workforce on. Our agriculture industry always needs this more, but also they don't need to be bogged down in a whole bunch of different expenses that just don't make sense. So that's a tough medium to find. I will say this though, the solutions are out there, and in Congress, things for too long have just gotten leveraged. If something's popular, well, it gets leveraged with something else that's a little less popular. Or it'll be too much of an incentive for more. But if you could get some of our legal immigration more streamlined, you address our workforce issues, and you can reduce some pressure on the border as well, right? It not in the current situation that we're at right now, that's overwhelming, but some of that could absolutely be addressed, and we've got to be willing to be doing that thoughtful work. I've loved the actual J-1 visa work that we've been able to do. So, okay. He was deciding. Okay, sir.
Hi, my name is Jeremy Cunningham. I'm the Public Policy Director for the Alzheimer's Association. You were on the committee. You were on the committee and were helpful to get Alzheimer's and dementia-related drugs available to aging adults that are living with dementia. And I'm thankful for that. That's why I bring it up. I'm thankful for the initiative that you've taken. Can you talk a little bit more about aging healthcare and some of the things that you're doing? I mean, it's when we look at Medicare, Medicaid, it literally could bankrupt a state. Mm-hmm. And so, could you talk a little bit about?
Yeah, the reason why it can bankrupt a state is because the states can't print money. Right. Those programs can also bankrupt our federal government, but we can print money. And that's not a good thing. I mean, it's a good thing that we can print money, and it's a good thing that the world trades in our reserves, and the U.S. is the currency reserve for the world. That's a good thing. But that potentially becomes at risk if we continue to run the deficits and have interest take over so much of what we're actually putting our federal budget in. So this is a perfect example of how our growing interest rates, or our growing interest costs, the money we spend just to service the debt, is going to crowd out things like proper investment in research for things like Alzheimer's. It's still on the forefront of really solving this really horrible, catastrophic issue. And if we can't do the investment work on the front end, the costs associated on the back end are far worse. The care that will be required if we can't find out some of the reasons and the factors that go into this is really difficult. Folks, that is, I think, a common thread throughout all of our healthcare policy. And I'm glad you brought up Medicare, because the last time I was up on campus, we met with the healthcare team in your office where they laid out what they had been doing in a pilot program to take Medicare recipients and a population here in Utah and try a new program that forces on that group more options for preventative, more primary care opportunities, right? And I actually think I wrote a capstone paper on this. Keep that buried in whatever archives you have here at the University of Utah. I'm sure it probably wasn't it probably wasn't APA guide format. It probably wasn't formatted very well. I passed. We're good. I passed. But what I wrote was like the costs we can save if we're more of a primary care focused environment are significant. And they have actual data that will talk about a population within Medicaid that if we put on more focus on doing primary preventative care, the cost savings are significant on the back end. And you know,
We actually call it risk reductions.
Right. And so the same thing would apply there. And that's a big behemoth to change, but it's kind of the work that we have to do. I sit on the health subcommittee of Ways and Means, and I would say that and within Energy and Commerce Committee, those are the two biggest areas that you could deal with healthcare outside of the veteran side. And you know, those are things that I want to continue to gain influence on, so I can kind of be that voice. So thank you. Please. We went over there too.
Why did you vote for a bill that puts trans children in danger by forcing schools to out them to their parents?
What bill is
This
that?
would be H.R. 5, otherwise known as the Politics Over Parents Act.
Okay, so it's funny the way everything gets named. That's the Parents' Bill of Rights Act on the Republican side. It's politics over parents when the Democrats do it. We get these back and forth things. The entire intent of that bill is to empower parents, making sure that they have the ability to know what's going on, what decisions are being made. It's as simple as that. I know that this issue is very, very contentious, and the majority of these things get done at the state level and where actually they should be. And so that bill was just to establish sort of an overarching, let's make sure parents are involved. And I think it is incumbent upon parents. I just left my son's school. It's incumbent upon parents to be more involved, because I've found that most schools are very communicative and willing to share what all of the decisions that they're making. And I don't want to make this continually how would you say, just a very political matter. Let's figure out a way to come together, show respect for our entire community, and there will be lines in the sand that have to be drawn on some of these issues, but we have to do it with respect to dignity. And I think that if you look at any of my communication, that will always be the case. So thank you. Please.
The mic.
Yourself as at the beginning as a positive, optimistic conservative.
Yes.
What does that mean in today's toxic political?
Yeah, it means I'm one of the few. No, it means that if you follow my newsletter, which is really my only ask, if as you come to these, you sign up for it or go to my website and sign up for it, you'll see that I'm trying to communicate reality over rhetoric. Right? Like I try to do a better job at explaining bills. I've taken votes that are in the minority of my party, and most are in the majority, but I've taken votes that are in the minority of my party, and I'll show up and explain myself. And I'm not going to bash other people for a position on this or that. I'm just going to explain myself. We need to be more rooted in policy. And candidly, I love what our governor's doing with respect to disagree better. I think that has had some reverberations. And we're approaching Jimmy Panetta, one of my colleagues on the Democrat side. I'm on like the same committees as him. To maybe share a little bit about how we go about doing that same concept. So that's what I say, optimistic conservative approach. Look, when Republicans do a tax package like they did in 2017, they doubled the child tax credit. Some would say that's too liberal, right? They doubled the child tax credit, they doubled the standard deduction. What income class does that target? Does that target the uber wealthy? No, it targets the lower and middle class Americans. And so it's my job to be someone that can communicate that in a positive way. If I just go back and say, all these Democrats are lying, they said this bill is only about the wealthy and this and that, and just bash, I don't get my point across that that's actually not the reality of the bill. The reality of the bill is to grow middle-class wages. And there was a significant portion that did it. But it's also to highlight, there was deficits that came from that time period. Over time, that revenue would grow, and that's shown that it has. But, there's issues there. And so I'm just trying to communicate reality over rhetoric and try to do it in a way that wherever you are on the political spectrum can be like, okay, well, at least I see where he's making his decisions. And then it's not based in just talking points or this or that. It's trying to be rooted as much as possible in policy. So
yeah.
And I'm not going to be successful at it always. People are always going to have found that no one always agrees with me, and that's okay.
One last question.
One last question, sir.
I've found in my life this is really a meaningless object for me. My voice tends to
You got a
vary.
decent enough voice.
In regards to what we're calling the border crisis right now, in my experience, addressing causes is a whole lot cheaper and more effective than causing effects, working on effects. We, meaning the United States, in my mind, has created the cause. We are the most drug-addled, drug-dependent population that has ever existed on the face of the earth. We've created the problem. We need to address that problem, in my mind, to solve the problem. We created the demand. We should be admiring the cartels. They're filling the demand of the American way. Secondly, by doing that, they're creating a population that is not secure there because of the threats of violence and everything, and they're coming here. What is your position? I know it's. I am stating a very unpopular position here. We're the problem.
I'll phrase it slightly different, but address your question completely.
What do you think
we have
ought
shown
to do to address that?
So I think it's I worked with this organization when I was at Cicero Group. It was one of our clients, the George W. Bush Institute. We did a lot of education related projects for them, but they also have a lot of good research out about some of the work that we did in partnership with. Is it called the Northern Triangle countries? It's like Colombia. Some of the areas that we were seeing a lot of migration from. And there was some economic development that took place, and it reduced the amount of immigration issues that were coming from those nations in Latin and South America. That is a really productive way to address this. And I think we should look at those options as much as possible. I'm not an expert on how that all played out and what we did, but there has been some success there. That's different than the drug thing. I'm going to address the drug thing. But yes, trying to create a situation in neighboring countries that there isn't this desire to flee from there. And Venezuela is a big issue. Their government is corrupt. It's been that way for a long time. Their economy fails, and people are going to desperately try to leave. And we should take the positive. I won't say, let me address the drug thing separately, but there is still work opportunities here. There is still a better life than a lot of other neighboring countries. So people still do want to come here. That has to be viewed as at least a positive if we can better manage it. Folks, the drug thing is my number one concern of what's going on at the border right now. Right? Fentanyl has rapidly infiltrated all of our communities. And if you were someone that had a surgery, was on some pain medications per your doctor, and eventually at time had run out, and you're not able to get a prescription, sometimes you went to illicit areas to go get something to deal with that pain, right? It's illegal, I'm not condoning it, but that's sometimes what happened. Well, before fentanyl had been so ubiquitous in our communities, like that was largely a quick fix. It was, it created some addiction, but it addressed the pain. Well, now some of those things, anything that is purchased, anything that is bought outside of a proper chain could very well be laced with fentanyl, very dangerous, and immediately kill people. And this happens in our own communities. The North Ogden police chief sat me down and talked to me about things that would have otherwise never been a drug overdose or fatal has now become that. And that is the biggest problem. So I'm not going to say, I will agree with you on the drug addiction that goes on in our country has created the demand, and the cartels are absolutely exploiting it. This product, this material is coming from China. It is getting sent to the drug cartels. They are transporting it through the border, mostly through ports of entry, right? The vast majority of this still comes through ports of entry. And even if we stop 90% of it, 10% is more than our nation has ever experienced before with this particular type of drug. There is porous areas of the border that this does come through, but mostly what happens here is a product and a workforce thing. Some of these individuals that are coming through the border, and if it's estimated in the range of 1.8 million over the last 3 years that have come here legally, they are now here. They're stuck in a court situation that's not conducive to anything productive, and they don't have any other option. The cartels know who they are. They are now using those individuals to run the product that they're still getting through. And it is creating a major problem in our communities. And so it's like you communicate it in a way that most people don't, and I think that's great. I would agree with you, though, that the demand that we have here for illicit drugs is so terrifying, and I'm all for being able to address and stop that. I worry about that with my family every single day. Like, how do I make sure that I'm the kind of dad that makes sure his kids never get involved in this, right? They're young right now, and what do we need to do? And the fact that it's so ubiquitous is what really concerns me. You're getting antsy because we're out of time.
We
I
are-
get that.
we are
If
out
I
of
could
time.
just end with, folks, I'll always show up. I do teletown halls. I do these in-person stuff. When you come to these, you're going to find areas that you agree with me on. You're going to find areas that you disagree with me on. And that's my job, is to be able to explain the context. I would ask you to build on the areas of agreement. Always question, contact my office, communicate your appreciation or your displeasure, but always try to understand the context. I learned from that Mayorkas thing that people go from 0 to 60 right now in a political world before even trying to even take a second to understand why in the world would you vote one way or vote this is the other. And that's not healthy for any of us in this society. And I'm hopeful that I can do as good of a job as I can about communicating the reality again over the rhetoric. And I love these opportunities to come and have the forum to be able to share. So I'll give you the last word.
Sorry to interrupt. I've been doing just what you said for 5 months, calling your office about one question. So I'd like to have the opportunity to ask.
Please. Yeah.
Why do you support providing wartime assistance to Israel, knowing that it's in gross violation of the late laws?
So why do I support aid to Israel?
Unconditional aid to Israel, knowing it's a direct violation of the late laws.
So Israel is our ally. They're our strongest ally in the Middle East, and I have long supported them to be able to support and defend themselves. We have a.
Why do we have Section 362 of Article 10 in the U.S. Code then? Is it just for fun?
So again, anything that I've supported up until October 7th, I would hope that was never controversial. We support their Iron Dome because they have rockets launched on their communities at a moment's notice, and that Iron Dome has been a significant protector of civilian life. After October 7th, these things get difficult. We haven't actually passed any foreign aid yet. We're navigating how we go about doing that, but I will support them to be able to preserve and protect what they have.
What would it take for you to
Were you as critical of 1,500 people, innocent civilians, getting massacred on October 7th? That's the question that you have to ask, okay? And so we have to be able to eliminate Hamas from power within Gaza. They are not there to support if the Palestinians had an option to oust them, they voted them in power a long time ago, and they've made it impossible for them to be taken out of power. And I am supportive of holding Hamas accountable and removing them from power. And it is a fog of war and a difficult scenario to be in, and it's tragic. I have done more than I would say any other Republican in Congress to work with the Egyptian government. I led a letter with Brad Schneider from the very onset to find and encourage as many humanitarian opportunities to get people out of harm's way in Gaza. And we're just re-implementing another one in a bipartisan letter to do as much an encouragement to find areas of humanitarian relief that can address some of the most critical aspects that where innocent Palestinians are getting killed as well. And so this is a tough one, and I get that. But look at my record, and I stand by it, but I have done more on the humanitarian piece and trying to build potential opportunities to save lives as any of my colleagues, to be honest with you. And I'm excited to stand by that, and we'll continue to do that work. So thank you, sir.
We are,
Understand. Thank you,
we
sir.
are grateful for all of you participating here today. It is such a great conversation for us to have all the way around. To our students, thank you for being engaged and for being here. Our members of our community, we're so glad to have you. And Congressman, we're glad to have you with us as well. Hand for Congressman
Thank
Blake
you
Moore.
all. Appreciate it.
We'll ask, please exit on that side of the room because we need to set up for another event. Thanks.